Buenos días. Es un gusto tener esta mañana con nosotros al doctor John Keane, profesor de política en la Universidad de Sydney, Australia, y en el Centro de Investigación Científica de Berlín, el Wissenschaftszentrum. Dear John, it's such a pleasure to have you with us in this beginning of our 7th National Social Science Conference. Thank you very much for accepting giving this lecture to us. It's a pity that we cannot have you in Mexico to chat with you after the lecture, but it's so good that Zoom and technology has allowed us to have you here and talk with you. I will make a short presentation in Spanish, then I will leave you the chair to you. Yo soy Cristina Puga. Les doy la más cordial bienvenida al doctor Keane. John fue uno de los primeros estudiosos de la política que prestó atención al nuevo papel de la sociedad civil en el último tercio del siglo XX. Desde su primer libro sobre el tema en 1988, alertando sobre el despertar de la sociedad civil en Europa del Este, ha sido un testigo inteligente de los cambios en la sociedad civil y ha elaborado importantes ideas sobre su desarrollo y tendencias. Originario de Australia, John Keane estudió en las universidades de Adelaide y de Toronto, así como en el King's College de Londres. En esta última ciudad fundó el Centro para el Estudio de la Democracia y publicó numerosos libros sobre los dos temas que ya he mencionado, entre otros, Media and Democracy, Democracy and Civil Society, Reflections on Violence, Civil Society, Old Images, New Visions, Global Civil Society. Varios de estos libros han sido traducidos a muchos idiomas y algunos han ganado importantes distinciones. Su libro, Vida y Muerte de la Democracia, finalista en uno de los mayores premios editoriales de Australia en 2010, traducido al menos en 8 idiomas y editado en México conjuntamente por el Fondo de Cultura Económica y el Instituto Electoral hace 3 años, se ha convertido en un texto de lectura obligada para estudiosos de la política y en general para todos aquellos que aspiren a tener una visión histórica del concepto y de la práctica de la democracia en el mundo. Para ahondar sobre el tema, John Keane ha publicado más recientemente Democracy and Media Decadence, When Trees Fall, Monkeys Scatter, Rethinking Democracy in China, y Power and Humility, The Future of Monetary Democracy. Letras Libres publicó recientemente una sugerente reflexión, tal vez demasiado temprana, de las consecuencias sociales y políticas de la actual pandemia. A nombre de Comexo, doy a John Keane la más cordial de las bienvenidas y le expreso nuestro agradecimiento por retomar con nosotros su tema pionero, el de la sociedad civil, a la luz de los grandes cambios ocurridos en el mundo y en las ciencias sociales. Welcome, John.
Hola, buenos días, señoras y señores. It is a great pleasure to and an honor to join you, thanks to the magic carpet of Zoom, to travel from the Southern Hemisphere, from Sydney, across the Pacific Ocean, to present the Conferencia Magistral of the 7th National Congress of the Social Sciences in Mexico. Muchas gracias por la invitación. We all know that these are strange Shakespearean times. a highly abnormal period in which the social sciences are everywhere feeling the pressure, the pinch, the grind of the great pestilence, of economic disruption, of populism, of government cutbacks and intimidations, of organized criminal violence, worries about the future of the university, disorientation and demoralization of teachers, of researchers and students. And that is why I have chosen to speak about a matter of fundamental importance, to offer some modest thoughts about the meaning of the social and the significance of the social sciences, of rethinking this category and looking in particular at the family member concept of sociedad civil, civil society. What you are about to hear and see is a sketch of an interdisciplinary research agenda for the 21st century social sciences. And along the way, you will see that I cast doubt on some existing usages of the key term, the social. For example, Hannah Arendt's, I would say, dismissive and reductionist account of society as a synonym for market-structured labor and consumption. It was a basic thesis of Hannah Arendt that politics was being destroyed by the modern invention and spread of the social. It's a view with which I disagree, as you will see. And along the way, you will see that I have objections to excessively abstract and generalized formulations such as human beings are essentially social animals. That view is bound up and traceable to the early 19th century origins of sociology as a discipline. A discipline, for example, the first use of the word sociologie is Auguste Kant in 1830, where the idea is that all individuals are born into a society. All societies strive to maintain order, internal harmony, so that a society is the totality of human relationships that is more than the sum of individual action. And society is independent of their will. That is a view that you will find, for example, in Ferdinand Tönnies' whole theory of Gesellschaft. It's an understanding of society that, of course, is found in Durkheim's account of organic solidarity and the problem of anomie in modern times. You will see that I have objections to this because what I want to do in this lecture is return to the 18th century, to the period of the foundation of the modern social sciences, to retrieve a forgotten phrase, sociedad civil, to think about that language, to retrieve it, to reconstruct it, to make a case for its continuing relevance in these years of the 21st century. And I want to do so in a rather autobiographical way, because I was involved in the attempt to rescue this phrase by sketching a 40-year recent history of the phrase civil society, its usages, and its contemporary relevance. Let me begin with the first phase. Let us call it the rebirth of civil society. It happened around 1980. It may seem strange, but 40 years ago, when the phrase civil society was used, it caused great puzzlement. It was a conversation stopper. It was not known widely, either among scholars or in the more general public. Of course, it had its antiquarian usages. Philosophers and historians reminded us that, for example, Aristotle, in his Koinonia Politicae, had a classical understanding of civil society as a well-governed polity ruled by laws. That's the understanding, for example, you will find in Thomas Hobbes or John Locke. It's true that there were also usages indebted to Antonio Gramsci, to the whole idea of the strategic importance of società civile. But in general, the phrase was not widely understood. In some contexts, for example, in Germany, the phrase had negative connotations. Bürgerliche Gesellschaft meant literally bourgeois society. So the translation didn't work well. And in fact, it was in the Berlin scene in the early 1980s that a neologism was made to deal with this problem. Zivilgesellschaft was born. There were languages in which the phrase civil society could not be translated. Czech is one that I experienced and know about personally. It was only later when the phrase civil society began to be used that a neologism, a new translation was created, občanská společnost. Against considerable odds, against this backdrop, nevertheless, what was remarkable in the 1980s was the way that this term became a key term in the social sciences and more generally in public life. It became what Germans call a Grundbegriff, a very basic concept that attracted great attention, that stirred up public disputes in the world of newspapers and books and pamphlets, and helped mobilize politically in many contexts resistance to arbitrary power. In one way, this revival of civil society in the early 1980s was a repetition of the old late 18th and early 19th century usages. For example, in the work of Adam Ferguson, in his essay on the history of civil society, published in 1760s. Or it was a revival of the way Hegel understood the term, or Tocqueville. But there were new things. Most striking is the way that the language of civil society became global. It was a popular term in many different contexts: Russia, China, Turkey, Mexico, for example. And it was, as well, it spread into the Islamic world. What did it mean during the 1980s and early 1980s and early 1990s when people used this? To put it at its simplest, when civil society was used as a phrase in this period, it referred to a dynamic web of personal and group interactions that included businesses, trade unions, households, cities, rural communities, sports clubs, media platforms, places of worship, and other social institutions framed by state laws, by government, and organized flows of information. A bit more abstractly, the phrase civil society referred to a dynamic mosaic of non-governmental initiatives, networks, and institutions through which citizens, with some measure of self-awareness and with a measure of civility and fearless self-confidence, live their lives. It was this understanding of civil society that was new in another sense. It included households, and it also included business, market processes, which is the way that Hegel, for example, had understood it. The question is, why did this rebirth of civil society take place from around 1980? I think there were three reasons. In the social sciences, of course, a concept can be used in three different, but usually entangled ways. It can be used as a descriptor to describe realities. It can also be used strategically to calculate how to achieve certain ends. And it can also be used normatively. And I think on all three fronts, so to say, the phrase civil society was reborn for descriptive and strategic and normative reasons. Briefly, in matters of description, the phrase made sense of developments such as the resistance to one-party state socialist regimes of the Soviet Union and China. Here, the critical moment is the birth of Solidarność in Poland in the early 1980s, where civil society was part of the poetry of that resistance, that attempt to form a trade union against the one-party socialist regime. The phrase descriptively made sense in contexts of resistance to dictatorship in Latin America and in Africa. The term also had descriptive power in analyzing the new social movements, such as feminism, Black empowerment, and green politics. And descriptively, it was an important phrase for reminding our scholars and publics that in the period of Thatcherism, the attempt to privatize, to marketize relations, the champions of civil society reminded the Thatcherites that there is such a thing as society, that no markets can function unless they are embedded within social relations of a civil society. No civil society, no markets. And in this sense, the phrase descriptively was a reply to, for example, Friedrich von Hayek's argument that the word society was no longer meaningful. Nonsense, as he put it, like the term moral stone. Well, civil society was a critique of the methodological individualism of that approach. There was a second reason for the rebirth, and that has to do with strategic advantages. The language of civil society had real organizing potential. I've mentioned already, it quickly became part during the 1980s of the poetry of practical nonviolent resistance to total state power. You will find this phrase in the documents of Charter 77, in, of course, the resistance of Solidarność. The term also became, during the 1980s, a key term, a watchword in the vocabulary of the United Nations, the World Bank, Amnesty International, and other global bodies. And wealthy philanthropists funded civil society research and action. For example, the Ford Foundation or George Soros's Open Society Foundation put lots of money into that organizing potential of civil society. It's worth noting in this second reason why the language of civil society was reborn and that it enjoyed considerable popularity. It's important to grasp, looking back on these years, the way that talk of civil society had transformative effects on the meaning of democracy and the strategies for democratization. It was thanks to this embrace of the category of civil society. You can see this in the work of Alfred Stepan, for example, in Juan Glintz, in Lawrence Whitehead, in the so-called field of transitology, that democracy came to mean a kind of polity in which there is a protection of a plurality of groups, associations, and networks. And so the transition to democracy means the building of a civil society and the protection of a civil society. This period, in matters of strategy, also had important implications for thinking about the key concept of power. Here, I would say there was a strong affinity between the work of Michel Foucault and the revival of civil society in the 1980s. To put it simply, thanks to the category of civil society, power was no longer understood as a fixed entity. Power was understood as always relational. Power was not thought of as synonymous with up there, with armed states. Power was everywhere. Power touched the lives of the everyday lives of people. The food people eat, the language that they speak, the way they conduct their bodies, the way men treat women. These were matters of power. And it followed from this insight that civil society became the champion of the idea that power relations could be transformed in the everyday domain, and that those small transformations could actually have much larger effects. Thirdly, a third reason for the revival of the language of civil society from around 1980 has to do with its normative attraction. Putting it simply, those who spoke of civil society in this period were ethical pluralists. They refused utopias of social harmony, of politically enforced order. Instead, they appealed to the toleration of diversity, the encouragement of complexity. Ralph Dahrendorf, the German-British sociologist in this period, made the case for a new citizen's right, the right to be different. The idea was, normatively speaking, that a civil society is an ensemble of social relations protected by government and law, in which the ethic of live and let live prevails, in which the right to be different is important. And this had implications for the way, for example, socialism was thought about. No longer could socialism be understood as the equality of citizens in a homogenized society. The right to be different became of great importance. And I would say in this period, one of the really important contributions was the work of Ernest Gellner in a book published in 1994 called Conditions of Liberty. Ernest Gellner, Czech British anthropologist and philosopher, said that the great advantage, normatively speaking, of a civil society is that there are many ladders that people have access to, and people in their own ways can climb these ladders and feel that they are winning dignity. They feel that it really matters, their ladder really matters. This metaphor, I think, was of great interest. And it should finally be made clear that, normatively speaking, the language of civil society had implications for the way we think about democracy. The standard formula that democracy is the rule of the sovereign people became questionable. Democracy, because the sovereign people is an abstract, a universal, it has a metaphysical quality. And so the champions of civil society in this first phase made the point that democracy is about real flesh and blood people, not imaginary entities, an imaginary entity called the sovereign people. So civil society, so to say, democratized the sovereign people principle. Democracy was understood differently, normatively speaking. Democracy means the protection, the guardianship of diversity, of pluralism, of humility, and heterarchy, as Warren McCulloch called it. Phase two. From around the year 2000, the language of civil society, theoretical interest in civil society began to decline. There was a backlash against it, and for reasons that I'm about to explain, it lost a measure of its visibility. Why did this happen? Partly because there were contexts where the phrase itself was banned. The example that's most obvious is China. In the year 2013, the party issued a so-called document number 9, in which the phrase Gongmin Shihui became a term not to be used in any official institution. Why? Because according to this document number 9, the phrase civil society was simply a Western anti-China force. There were also theoretical objections. Interestingly, Michel Foucault was among those who thought that talk of civil society was suspect, that it suffered a kind of Manichaeism, as he put it, because it represents the state as bad and society as good. I think this was a misunderstanding, a misrepresentation of the language, but that kind of critique, that the champions of civil society wanted to abolish government, or that the government was seen always as restraint, that it could never enable the lives of citizens. I think that was a very common critique. There were Republican thinkers, communitarians, who disliked the emphasis on diversity, social difference, the politics of difference. There were those who, on the left, who criticized the language of civil society as bourgeois. I can speak personally about the attacks that were directed at me during the 1980s and early 1990s. Edward Thompson, the famous English historian, in writing criticized me for saying that by using the language of civil society, the achievements of socialism, as he put it, in the Soviet bloc were called into question, and this should not happen. The Yugoslav League of Communists on several occasions called me a bourgeois apologist, and there was generally the view that those who used, on the left, those who used the language of civil society were simply champions of commodity production and exchange. This, I think, was a serious misrepresentation. Much more important, after the year 2000, approximately, was the force of the crushing force of what we now call neoliberalism. The view that state functions should be privatized as possible, that there should be governance arrangements put into place. That is, that business and government and stakeholders should should develop policies and implement and administer those policies without reference to civil society. The consequence was that the language of civil society began to disappear. It was replaced by talk of marketizing, of governance, and this, I think, was a key reason why that language of public-private partnerships, of stakeholders, of market mechanisms, of governance, analytical frameworks, and so on, became much more the prevailing language, and civil society suffered from this. There were also intellectual criticisms of the theory of civil society that seemed to me to do damage to it. And I would give as an example the work of Jürgen Habermas, with whom I have over the years debated this critique. Habermas thought of civil society as equivalent to the life world, the Lebenswelt. he pictured civil society as a non-state, non-market space of communicative action, in which citizens deliberate, in which they make meaning together, they form themselves into deliberative republics. I think the conceptual geography of Habermas's picture of civil society is very questionable. From a systems theoretical point of view, what Habermas argued was there are three sectors: bureaucratic state power, money-driven commodity production and exchange, the market, and civil society. The problem, I think, with this approach, with its conceptual geography, is that it automatically ruled out citizens' actions and the democratization of state and market. It was bad news, in other words, for anti-corruption commissions, for trade unions, for women's organizations, for environmental networks. But also, descriptively speaking, I think that a great weakness of Habermas's view, rather narrow view of civil society, is by separating market and civil society, which was never done in the early modern period. Those who spoke of civil society always spoke of market. The great problem in Habermas's approach is that it forgot that no market can function without the elements of a civil society: non-violence, negotiating with strangers, the dependence upon households. Markets require a social habitus, and by analytically separating the two, this insight was lost. Third phase, of the ethical appeal, of the strategic and descriptive attraction of the idea of civil society, of a non-violent complex set of interactions among people, protected by law, against predatory businesses and power-hungry governments. What's driving this renaissance of civil society in our times? I think there is a handful of drivers. They are interconnected. Most obviously, number one is the experience from 2007 and 8, initially in the Atlantic region, but globally, the experience of market failures, the near collapse of the banking and credit sector, the imposition of by governments of austerity, has reminded our scholars and millions of people that markets are prone to self-paralysis, and that when markets fail, they have not only environmental damaging consequences, but they have damaging effects on the social lives of citizens. This is the kind of insight you will find in the films of Ken Loach in England, which are about the growth of a precariat, the damaging consequences of the commodification of daily life. And this problem of market failures has, I think, expressed itself in growing concerns with social inequality, with household debt, with the growth of what Hungarians call oligarchs, like Viktor Orban, like Andrej Babiš in the Czech Republic. That is, neoliberalism has had damaging effects on the social foundations of actually existing civil societies. And therefore, so the argument goes, among the champions of civil society, there must be a decommodification of areas of life that are currently ruled by money. And this requires social resistance. This requires social organization that Governments alone cannot reverse this process. And here I would draw a parallel with our times, with what took place in the 19th century. You know well that the social question came to be of great importance in the early decades of the 19th century. The birth of cooperatives, of friendly societies, of guilds, of trade unions, of political parties, the invention of the word socialism, social democracy, were all part of the attempt by a young civil society to decommodify, to try to re-embed business within the structures of everyday life, and to prevent predatory businesses from destroying people's lives. Similarly, it seems to me something like that backlash, that civil society critique of predatory business, of market failures is going on. You can see this, for instance, in the growth of crowd sourced public service media. The Correspondent in the Netherlands is a case in point. It's a civil society media platform that does not take money from governments or businesses. Airbnb has been an example of this. Carbon neutral cities, social networks of support for the homeless, for refugees, for senior citizens are part of this. And I think that this emphasis on decommodification, of the attempt, as Karl Polanyi famously put it, to re-embed business within the structures of a civil society. You can find many other instances of this. Basic income schemes, as in Finland, where we have the first countrywide experiment in this new mechanism going on. The strengthening of trade union rights, the reduction of working time, more just maternity, paternity leave arrangements. These are all part, I would say, of the politics of a civil society that wants to reclaim the field of economy to better embed it within more just social relations. There's a second reason for the renaissance of civil society. I call them digital mutinies. What do I mean by this? We all know that there is an unfinished digital communications revolution going on. We all know that it has a dark side. The way that, for example, lies, bullshit, deep fake mashups are easily spread. We know as well that there is unprecedented data harvesting of people's lives, hence the talk, Shoshana Zuboff, of surveillance capitalism. But there is another trend, a counter trend, I believe to be very important, and I think it is feeding the resistance of civil societies, where civil societies, actually existing civil societies, take advantage of this communications revolution. For example, the way that copying information is so easy, the way in which it can be spread with no time-space barriers, the way that it can be replicated is a dynamic that is being felt not only in the despotisms of Russia and China and Saudi Arabia, but also in the so-named democracies. What, in other words, is going on is that, thanks to digital network media, citizens living in civil society publicize the problem of arbitrary power, injustices. They call into question existing power arrangements. The most striking, it seems to me, or among the most striking examples, is the greening of present day civil societies. If you look at actually existing civil societies, you will find many innovations, citizens' science projects, rewilding schemes, the establishment of green think tanks and green academies. You will find that documentary filmmaking and photography is interested in problems of environment. And of course, there are daring multimedia insurgencies such as Extinction Rebellion or such as climate strikes that have drawn young school children who are not yet formally citizens into the politics of civil society. What is striking about these digital mutinies in the field of environmental matters is that, of course, they issue a warning that Homo sapiens, we may possibly be destroying the biosphere upon which we depend and in which we dwell. And what is especially striking is that this is the first time in the history of modern civil societies that civil society is redefined so that it means an ensemble of social organizations and networks in which people dwell and live their lives, with a strengthening sense that a civil society is entangled with nature, that the future of civil society depends upon the protection of the biomes in which people live. This is an entirely new understanding. Third driver of the renaissance of civil society, I would put simply as the militarization of policing. This is happening globally in many contexts. This militarization of policing is partly driven by the way that armed forces sell off their weaponry and their equipment to domestic policing organizations. That's going on in Mexico, and it's also going on in the United States. Policing is not what it used to be. It is now, it resembles combat. It's as if every protest is treated as the enemy within. Police armed not only with pepper spray and drones, but armored trucks, sniper assault rifles. All of this is symbolically and materially threatening of a civil society. In the United States, one Black person still is killed by someone employed or protected by police forces. One Black person is killed every 28 hours. In the United States, around 50,000 SWAT, special weapons and tactics raids are carried out annually on households. And of course, there are targets, disproportionately speaking, of these this militarized policing: Muslims, people of color, people of transgender identities. And although this militarized policing is conducted in the name of improving the safety of civil society, that is not the way it is being seen. It is being seen as the destruction of civil society. Civil society becomes something like an occupied war zone. Fourth, almost finally, I think the new populism is itself a driver of this renaissance of civil society. We have had a very big discussion globally about this new populism. I do not think that it is, as Casmuda and the Chilean social scientist Cristobal Rovira Calvasa says, I do not think that this new populism is a thin-centered ideology. It's actually an autoimmune disease of democracy. And when you look at Bolsonaro, you look at number 45, in the United States, if you look at Erdogan, Orban, Kaczynski, then you can see that actually it's much more than a so-called thin centered ideology. It has pathologies. Populism requires big-mouth demagogues, redeemers, as Enrique Krause says. And these demagogues, in order to protect themselves, especially when in office, do damage to democratic power sharing, power monitoring institutions. They attack independent journalism. They attack rule of law judiciaries. They do not like expertise. And not only that, but in action, populism requires, functionally speaking, its spirit, so to say, requires outgrouping, the designation of enemies of the people. Foreigners, it depends on the context, Muslims, are treated as marginal to the people. Eric Trump famously said that the whole politics of populism requires defining people who are, quote, not even people. It's a great paradox that the politics of populism, style of politics that does what it does in the name of the people, excludes people. And therefore, it's not surprising that the new populism breeds resistance against sexual harassment, fights for sanctuary cities, resistance from civil society to police heavy militarized policing, the defense of queer networks, crowd-funded social media platforms, support for mosques and synagogues and other places of worship. The argument of this resistance is that the new populism is actually an apology for incivility, for greed, for concentrated wealth, for the destruction of democratic power-sharing institutions. And this kind of resistance, I think, is a key reason why the language of civil society is back. And finally, I think when historians look back on this period of the Great Pestilence, they will see that emergency rule became a problem in this period. I have tried to write about this dynamic in Lettres Libres essay published earlier this year. We know that in many global contexts, the pestilence has been met by the imposition of emergency rule by states, the limitation of public gatherings, cities that become vast spaces of emptiness, school closures, the proroguing, the shutting down, at least temporarily, of parliaments, the closure of cinemas, restaurants, bars, clubs, gyms, mosques, synagogues, churches, temples. Airports have become ghost institutions, public elections, public events cancelled, election rallies that were postponed or didn't happen. The use of drones to put under surveillance citizens to ensure that they are obedient to the rule of law. You can find this in India, where the police and army have played a very important and sometimes frightening role in enforcing this emergency rule. Well, the question is, how do civil societies react to this? We know that there are cases, for example, in the United States, where there are protests, often with guns, decrying the taking away of liberty, and the demand is for reopening the economy. There is certainly this reaction, but there's also, I would say, in addition, and much more sympathetic to the ethos of civil society, signs of the strengthening of the shared sense of social solidarity. What South Africans call Ubuntu. This means an ethic of interdependence. I am because you are. A strengthening of that sense, I think, is evident. There's lots of social goodness, civility, generosity. I think the phrase social distancing is actually misleading. Physical distancing, yes, but thanks to digital network media, a lot of social bridging and bonding is going on. Here I speak to you thanks to the magic carpet of Zoom at this Conferencia Magistral. It wouldn't have been possible earlier. There is, I think, signs that this pestilence is arousing concern about long working hours, about the lack of work, about the heightened importance of well-being, and the importance, for example, of remunerating well and respecting workers, nurses, doctors, teachers, cleaners, ambulance drivers, delivery drivers, call centers, supermarket workers, rewarding them, acknowledging that no civil society can function well without their labor. I think in this respect, things are still open, but the renewal of civil society and the language of civil society, I think, is partly the consequence of this great pestilence. Señores y señores, I want to close. I have in this lecture tried to make a case for returning to the founding moment, the founding spirit and trajectory of the early modern social sciences born of the 18th century. I have tried to recover, to reconstruct this old category of civil society that has long been a Grundbegriff, a basic concept in our social sciences, but goes missing periodically. I have, in this lecture, tried to remind us of its descriptive and its strategic and normative value. And I have tried, by way of this short lecture, to reset a broad research agenda that requires transdisciplinary work, an agenda that embraces a wide range of methods, both quantitative and qualitative, a research agenda that includes ecumenically many different themes. For example, stretching from the need for a sharpened understanding of the concept through to the importance of the concept of civil society for researching social movements, households, racism, queer politics. I have made a case for the way that it seems to me it has transformative effects in the way that we think about power, or the role of market commodity production and exchange. It helps us rethink neoliberalism, of populism, of the potential of the unfinished digital communications revolution. It also, I have tried to say, helps us reimagine democracy. It helps us understand the historic role that civil societies are playing probably in this period of the Great Pestilence. And I have also tried to suggest that the language of civil society is really important for understanding the greening that is going on and the way that civil society is playing a vital role in protecting biomes against predatory power of big businesses and big governments. In all of these and in other ways, the social sciences would be able to retain and further develop their public relevance, I believe, in many contexts on our planet. I have tried to show that the theory of civil society is hugely important for universities, for social science teaching and research, and that it also has relevance for the public outreach of universities to citizens, to government policymakers and other bodies. But in the so-called real world, you will be asking the question, what is the future of civil societies as they are experienced or as they are yearned for in this third decade of the 21st century? My prediction is that the ideal and the fact of civil society will have staying power. Civic solidarity in pestilent societies of emergency rule, anti-populist politics, multimedia digital mutinies, citizens' efforts to socialize markets, to protect biomes, the refusal of despotism. I think the ideal and the fact of civil society will continue to appeal to disgruntled and disesteemed people who wish for better lives but find themselves exploited by predatory employers who suffer racial abuse and other forms of violence, who experience sexual harassment, religious discrimination, or who are penniless, unemployed, starving, underhoused, and homeless. Civil society happenings will continue to happen, and contemporary politics, I think, will be salted and peppered by ecological protests, by marches on parliaments, electoral upsets, refusals of gang violence, and digital mutinies, big and small. But this much is clear, but I want to end with a warning. I want to end on a precautionary tone. Past experiences tell us, as you know well in Mexico, that civil societies can be destroyed, pulverized, wiped out very quickly. Their destruction happens much more easily and many times faster than their slow motion, step-by-step practical construction. This warning, this point, contains a call to action, of course. Only citizens and their chosen representatives, helped by watchdog public accountability institutions, helped by civil society actions and organizations through networks and so on, only civil societies in the end can protect themselves and ensure that civil societies live on. And so it should be obvious that the survival and blossoming of civil society is in every context ultimately a matter of politics. But it is also a matter of language, of clarifying the language that we use to describe, interpret, act upon the world in everyday life and within larger scale institutions that shape our lives. And so I would like to end with a thought from Octavio Paz. When a society decays, he wrote, it is language that is the first to become gangrenous, gangrenosa. As a result, Paz continued, social criticism must begin with grammar. It must begin with the re-establishment of meanings. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to John Keane. It has been a very interesting, stimulating lecture. And if you agree, John, we have time to hear some questions from the some colleagues who have been watching you. Quisiera decirle al público que nos está oyendo a través de YouTube o de Facebook, que desafortunadamente esta es una conferencia grabada. La diferencia de horarios entre México y Australia impidió que pudiéramos hacerla presencial. Por lo tanto, no podremos atender sus preguntas. Sin embargo, tenemos aquí algunos colegas invitados que harán preguntas para ampliar la posibilidad de que algunos de los conceptos de John Keane se profundicen. Entonces, con mucho gusto oiré lo que ustedes quieran decir y me pidan la palabra. Está Fernando Castaños.
No sé si tengo que iniciar mi video o hablo sin ser visto. I don't know if I have to start my video camera or if I'm going to speak with...
Del lado derecho, Fernando, tienes unos puntos suspensivos. Ahí puedes echar a andar tu video.
No me deja. Doesn't allow me to.
Ok, ahí estás.
Okay. This has been very motivating. You've made me think a lot about the three phases, and I'm sure we will all be thinking more about the third phase in the following days and months and perhaps years. But I would like to start with an observation regarding the first phase in Mexico. The phrase civil society became a common coin very quickly, to a large extent, thanks to the writings of Carlos Monsiváis, referring to the earthquake we had in 1985. And then the phrase was certainly a descriptor, as you've said, and it had tremendous strategical power. The normative dimension of it developed afterwards. But in the mid-80s, it was mainly a descriptor and a strategic set. And what linked the descriptive with the strategical force of the phrase was that it condensed an argumentative potential. It was an argumentative platform. The phrase embodied an implicational scale. The use of the phrase civil society immediately meant there was a crisis of agency. The government wasn't reacting properly to what had happened and couldn't deal with what it had to deal. It couldn't provide security, it couldn't provide reconstruction, it couldn't provide the basic needs. And civil society started replacing the government as the main agent to deal with such a phenomenon. But the crisis of agency also meant a crisis of representation. Then the government was not representing what it should. And that led to a third meaning, a crisis of the form of government. It wasn't only the party in power that was failing. It was the regime. It was how things were organized. So this scale, crisis of agency, crisis of representation, crisis of form of government, was the argumentative platform that the phrase civil society embodied. And that's the main reason probably why it spread so quickly. Unfortunately, not much was built on it. And I believe this was mainly the fault of the first president after the transition, Vicente Fox. He didn't understand what had happened and what had allowed him to become president. He wanted civil society to become a party he could direct and base his legitimacy upon. That's all I wanted to say for the moment. Thank you.
Gracias, Fernando. I will let several people to do their questions or comments, and then we'll give you the chair again, John.
Right.
Alejandro Monsiváis.
Gracias, Cristina. Thank you very much. Hello again. John, it's I feel very happy to be here to participate in this seminar, in this conference. I am also a great admirer of your work. I've been following your books and arguments, and it is really exciting for me to share some comments. I find hugely stimulating your idea of resignifying, of recovering the notion of civil society to address and understand a wide and ample examples of movements and political agency and expressions of resistance and so on. But I wish this time to express some skepticism and so to speak, as a political scientist, as a social scientist, I want to share with you that I am not fully convinced that we need to recover the idea of civil society. I understand that it is a very helpful image, a metaphor to keep in mind that the social is important, that in politics, in democracy, in the many challenges that democracy is facing, we shall not avoid thinking of social movements and citizens and etc. But these are my objections, my doubts. First of all, when we move into more specific institutional frameworks, I feel that your previous idea of monitory democracy was even more illuminating to address some new and emerging forms of, forgive me for using this word, governance, but I feel that it addresses more clearly some democratic innovations. And the moment we try to understand these new mechanisms of deliberation and representation and participation, we do not need anymore the concept of civil society, even when we are in the back, it is in the background. I believe the same happens with the idea of populism. This is a very important issue. And I side with those that prefer to specify the concept of what is a populist speech and populist discourse to understand how it functions and how people resist it or challenge it and etc. And I wonder how the idea of civil society as a specific concept help to understand the effects and the consequences of populist leaders in specific contexts or in specific institutional designs or promoting the erosion of democracy. So I will leave it here in order to hear other colleagues, but that's my main points. It doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy your conference. It's always amazing. It's really comprehensive and detailed. Thank you very much.
Gracias, gracias Alejandro. No sé si hay algunas otras. Yo tengo dos preguntas. I would like to ask John. One is about, well, if one of the changes that have to be done are through language, I would like you to deal a little bit more on the difference among citizenship, civil society, people, as it is used by many populist leaders, and even association as a concept which implies that it's a tendency, a trend of individuals to be together. So I think if we are going to deal again with civil society, it's important to find the difference among all of them. The other is a very coyuntural question, and it is about the recent development of the United States politics. Do you see Biden's triumph as a triumph of civil society? Was it a movement of civil society, and if so, are there two different civil societies with different trends right now in the United States? Is there a good civil society and a wrong civil society?
No.
If there are no more questions right now, I will leave John. There is one by Jorge Cadena. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for your lecture. It was great. I really enjoyed your views on civil society and the current state of democracy and its relation with populism. I have two questions. The first is that in previous understandings of civil society, the importance of organizations was stressed, was said to be crucial. In a way, civil society meant organizations, civil society organization or social movement organizations. But now, in the way you talk about the emergence of this concept, it looks more diffuse and less organized. You talk about it in terms of networks and in terms of resistance that comes and goes. Some of the examples you mentioned are these digital mutinies that seem just to happen. We don't understand clearly how they start and what makes a comment or a critique or something viral. It just happens and then they disappear. So I would like to hear your comments on that. And the second point, I think it's really important what you mentioned, quoting Octavio Paz, this idea of the reestablishing of meanings. I think it's very important because populists lie and lie a lot, and they distort reality and they deceive people. They tend to polarize societies. Then I think it's really important to clarify concepts and to fight for the meaning of concepts. I like that very much, and that gives us social scientists something to work on. So thank you very much.
Gracias, Jorge. Nos quedan prácticamente 12 minutos, 15 minutos para terminar. Entonces le voy a pasar ya la palabra a John. We have about 14 minutes to end the session, John, so it's up to you.
Well, muchas gracias for these wonderful comments, rather generous. I was expecting much tougher critiques, but nevertheless, inside these questions are very important points, and I'm not sure I can do justice to them, but I shall try to, and maybe just work through them in the order in which they came. To Fernando, muchas gracias for this short history of civil society in Mexico. And I am aware that the 1985 earthquake was a seminal moment, a moment of disruption, and in which the significance of social life and the ability of people in their everyday lives to take care of things, despite an incompetent or resistant government. I understand the significance of that. And I would say that that crisis of government agency, that crisis of representation, that crisis of the form of government that you spoke about, has for me two implications. I mean, more generally, so to say, more theoretically, that are of global importance. One is that I have become very interested in, and in my work on democracy and media, I have tried more and more to highlight the problem of risk, of precaution, of the need for precaution, of the importance of expertise, which I understand in the sense that Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum physics, redefined expertise. The expert, which was historically, the term itself came from the French, and in the 19th century, it was the enemy of popular power. The people are ignorant. And so we need specialists of knowledge who can, in a way, replace the priest, and then can correct the stupidities, the follies of the people. That's why John Stuart Mill, for example, in England, proposed that we, with degrees, should get extra votes. Niels Bohr pointed out that in the early years of the 20th century, total war, the bomb, chemical warfare, and so on, that experts take on a new significance, and it means something different to speak of an expert. An expert, it's the way I understand, is someone who is experienced, wise in their field, who know that they do not know everything, and who remind their colleagues and governments and businesses and other organizations that they don't know everything, and that therefore a measure of precaution, worrying about risk, building institutions that can alert whole political orders to danger, the importance of early warning detector institutions has become very important in my work. And I think that in this respect, the Mexican experience would be an early example of that, attempt to build the whole principle of precaution into the language and the practice of civil society and of democracy. It is a big discussion, but although I didn't say this directly, when I was describing the greening of civil societies, I mean, quite a lot of that has to do with this attempt to institutionalize and spread the practice of precaution, you know, of not destroying a species for the sake of development, for instance, or the dangers of floods and bushfires. And of course, this pestilence is an environmental question, and I think it does raise hugely important matters to do with risk and precaution and expertise. So this is one implication. The other, in your point, in your remarks, Fernando, is of course the problem of the relationship between political parties and civil society. Your remark that Vicente Fox, you know, wanted to politicize the civil society, turn it into a force of party politics, I mean, was misguided, and it had damaging consequences. I think, I didn't say anything about it today, but the whole problem of how civil societies are represented in the field of law and government, you know, that's another lecture, but it is, you have correctly put your finger on that. For the record, I don't think that an election-centered, an exclusive emphasis on elections and parties is the solution to this problem. And one of the reasons I have, in the last several decades, developed this whole idea of democracia monitorizada is to make the case that representation can happen through multiple channels, that you can have a civil society body like Amnesty that represents, even though not directly elected by people, represents people who suffer indignity, who are suffering, who suffer torture, imprisonment, disappearance. Those civil society bodies are of increasing importance, and I think no healthy civil society can do without them. To Alejandro, I am warned rightly that the relationship between monitory democracy and civil society was rather lost in this lecture. But as I've just tried to say, my understanding of the descriptively and strategically and normatively, the whole idea of monitory democracy, this new historical phase of democracy in which we live, that I think began in the 1940s. My understanding is that every civil society in practice has to be the receptor. It has to be the base in which public monitoring of power, the restraint of arbitrary power happens. And so it is not just simply through elections and parliaments and elected representatives that this happens, or through the courts. It also happens from below, so to say, from the field of civil society. And in that respect, there is an elective affinity between civil society and monitory democracy. On populism, it's a big discussion. But at one point in the text, although I didn't say it this morning, is that what populist parties and their redeemer demagogues do is they mobilize parts of a civil society in the name of the people. They want to get their hands on the levers of government and law, and that process that has its foundations in civil society, in fact, is destructive of civil society. That is, it's a strange case of a kind of pathology in which civil society collaborates in its own demise, that incivility is spread, bad language, hostility to others who don't belong. Every recording of populism it comes tinged with violence. That's not accidental. The aesthetics of violence are attractive to this new populism. Knock the crap out of them, carry them out of here, was what number 45 repeatedly said during his bid for election in 2016, and it still goes on. So populism requires the liberties of a civil society to associate, to support a party, etc., etc. But the pathologies of populism lead through time to, I would say, the weakening and the destruction of civil society, and hence the resistance to populism. To Cristina, you asked me on matters of language about the family of terms: citizenship, civil society, people, association. We could add cities, civility. In various European languages, these are a family of terms that feed upon one another. I think in my work on civil society and what I try to present today, I think understood along these lines, sociedad civil has implications for the way we think about citizenship. Yes, citizenship is the equal right to enjoy the entitlements of being a citizen and the duties of being a citizen. But in its history, the concept of the citizen had communitarian implications. There was often the likening of being a citizen to a member of a family. What I think civil society does is pluralize the understanding of what it means to be a citizen. And I think Ralph Dahrendorf was among the very first who made that point. To be a citizen is to enjoy the right to be different and to expect the duty of others to accept that difference. I think it to be of great importance. Civil society has obviously implications for this abstract metaphysical signifier, the people. To repeat, civil society is the enemy of populism, because to speak of a civil society is to speak of flesh and blood, concrete, plural identities of people living their lives who are not the people in this this abstract signifier of populism. And you mentioned the word association. It should be remembered that in various European languages, societas is the Latin. It means association, friendship, joining together. In Spanish, you have sociedad to refer to organizations of people. And it seems to me that civil society requires that word association, societas, but it pluralizes it. You know, whether one likes this or not, the concept of a civil society points descriptively, strategically, normatively to the pluralization of associations and considers that pluralization to be a good thing, in the sense that there is breathing space, greater breathing space for people, so to say, to live their lives. Biden, number 45, I think here, referring back to Fernando, I think what we have just witnessed and what we are witnessing at the moment is a partial defeat of the politics, the style of populism. I think that the Democratic Party, although it has many tendencies, it certainly has left tendencies. The Democratic Party led by Biden and Harris have actually managed to put together an electoral coalition of Black people who are angry and feel disesteemed, especially in cities like Detroit and Philadelphia. Disproportionate numbers of women, people who live in suburbs, Latinos, except in Florida, where they are concerned about Puga and so on. But in Nevada and Arizona, they voted disproportionately for Biden. It has a cross-class quality about it, and the victory, which is producing great public joy, which will disappear very quickly in disappointment. The victory was undoubtedly, in strong measure, driven from below, you know, by networks and organizations, media savvy organizations, calling on people to come out and vote. And in the United States, the pattern has been for this generation that the poorer and more powerless you are, the less likely you are to vote. That trend has been reversed in this election, and it has led to, of course, great hopes. One last comment about the victory of Biden and Harris is that, yes, there is a division, serious divisions within the actually existing civil society of the United States. Instead of speaking of two civil societies, because I think the tendencies are entangled, that 48% of those who voted for number 45, you know, their lives are entangled with supporters of Biden and Harris. But I would say that it should be obvious that one of the effects of this 4 years of populism and demagoguery, you know, the caudillo in the White House, is to spread incivility, to strengthen the grip of an uncivil society. An uncivil society is when a civil society is poisoned by incivilities, by violence, by discrimination, by prejudice. And the grip of incivility on the American civil society is undoubtedly strengthened in the last 4 years. And we shall see how it's it is discharged, whether that trend can be reversed. To Jorge, thank you very much. Muchas gracias also for your comments and criticisms. You are right to observe that my picture of, descriptively, of a civil society is more fluid. I think there is much space in it for organizations. I mentioned, for example, in the field of green politics, the invention of all kinds of new institutions, citizen science networks. I could have added, and I mentioned green think tanks and academies and so on. I could have mentioned, bioregional assemblies. What I think is important about your remark is that there does seem, for reasons to do with the unfinished communications revolution, I think there are signs of a greater diffuseness. I think of fluidity, of, we would say in English, a growing ephemeral quality to that civil society, a kind of permanent shape-shifting that goes on. Digital mutinies that come and go, organizations and networks that appear and then disappear, whose effects are very difficult to trace, sociologically speaking. They're very difficult to measure. And I would say that, I didn't mention this, but I have been for some time interested in what modern civil societies and what democracy as a way of life and as a form of government, what they do to our shared senses of time. And I would say, to put it very simply, that there is a democratization of temporal rhythms. The belief that there is an evolutionary progress towards betterment has been weakened radically for a century. But the lived experience of multiple rhythms, I think, is, from the point of view of the social sciences, I think it's a very important topic. So, for instance, just to mention some examples of this, a much heightened shared sense in actually existing civil societies of the different rhythms of the biosphere. Trees, rivers, animals have a different temporal rhythm. And we are learning about that different temporal rhythm. Or think about the way in which aging, the meaning of aging is transformed. The three ages of life, young, middle-aged, old, is being scrambled. Of course, it's a class-dependent thing and so on, but there is, I think, a sense that life's biorhythms are different. And I think that you could extend this idea, what I think, to other empirical examples. What I think is that you are right to put your finger on the fluidity. Zygmunt Bauman called it the liquidity of actually existing civil societies. I think there is some descriptive analytical purchase in that idea. One example that I mentioned in the text, but not in the talk, is I like very much Bruno Latour's whole idea of the parliament of things. Much to be said about that, but these are gatherings, so to say, usually by digital media and physical presence. These are gatherings to highlight an eco problem. And those parliament of things, not organized by political parties or governments, are civil society phenomenon, and they tend to disappear very quickly. And sometimes they have very large-scale effects. About the importance of language, Jorge, I fully agree, and I think your remark is very profound. Populism, you are living in a populist moment in Mexico. Populism in Bolsonaro's Brazil, in Orban's Hungary, in Erdogan's Turkey, to mention just a few examples, or Kaczynski's Poland. In every recorded case, what we have is a politics of language in which, yes, the spreading, the willful spreading of lies, of bullshit in the technical sense, of kinds of discourse that are designed to set aside, to sweep away any questions of veracity, is spreading. Bots, algorithmic bots that spread opinions. In Russia, the evidence is that 50% of social messaging through media is produced by and spread by algobots. These are phenomena that populism have embraced and have circulated, and they're very dangerous. They're very dangerous for matters of truth, and because there is outgrouping that is part of the spirit of populism, that implies in practice the destruction of identities, the destruction of pluralism. And I have tried, one last comment, I have tried in my most recent book, The New Despotism, which I hope will have a Spanish translation. I have tried to show the close affinity between the new populism and despotic politics and outcomes. We will see what happens in the United States, but in my view, it was clear that number 45 was taking the United States along the pathway of a despotism, in which courts are neutered, in which the state bureaucracies are weakened, in which there are systematic attacks on independent investigative journalism, and constant referencing of the people. Well, that's a sure pathway that Erdogan has taken, that Orban took successfully. It took 10 years in Hungary to transform a constitutional power-sharing monitory democracy with an active civil society into something like a despotism. And so for me, in this latest book, I'm reflecting on a 21st century trend, the new despotism that involves the destruction of civil societies, the destruction of democracia monitorizada. I think it's probably enough for today. And I wanted just to say again to Cristina, thank you so much muchas gracias for being a very benevolent, fair-minded, civil chair, and to the questioners, thank you also, muchas gracias, for your insights, your wisdom, and your suggestions about how to think better and differently about this topic.
Muchas gracias, John. Muchas gracias a todos los que han estado aquí esta sesión con nosotros. Ha sido realmente muy inspirador, muy interesante todo lo que has dicho, y esperamos que no sea la última oportunidad de platicar contigo. Te apartamos para el congreso siguiente. We are booking you for the next Congress. Ok. Muchas gracias a todos. Buenos días. Buenas tardes.